Have you ever stopped to think that maybe our traditional ideas about military power, especially out in the Indo-Pacific, might be changing? Like, does just having more big ships, does that really mean you have control anymore? Something to think about. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really significant strategic shift. We're trying to understand this move towards asymmetric warfare and a new kind of containment. It's all about using low cost tech against those really expensive traditional assets. Our mission here is to sort of unpack how this strategy could deter, maybe even deny coercive expansion by the PRC, the People's Republic of China, by basically making it too costly for them.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is this core idea of um, asymmetric attrition, but launched from land. Suddenly, raw shipbuilding capacity,
Yeah.
how many hulls they can pump out, it becomes less important. Think about it. A land-based anti-ship missile, like an NSM or maybe a LRASM, or even like a swarm of cheap drones. We're talking 20,000, maybe $200,000 per drone.
Huh.
That could disable or sink a planned destroyer or carrier that costs, what, hundreds of millions? Maybe billions.
Wow. Okay. So the cost difference is just
It's
staggering.
massive. And it's not just the money, you see. It's about changing their whole risk calculation. A tiny investment holding a huge asset at risk. That fundamentally alters deterrence.
Okay, so if these cheap drones and missiles can potentially make big ships less relevant, how does that play out? You mentioned swarm zones. What does that look like? How does a coastline become a weapon?
All right, so imagine setting up coastal missile batteries, precision ones, and linking them with constant surveillance, maybe from drones too. Places like, say, Taiwan or the Philippines could create these overlapping no-go areas for Chinese naval groups. These drone swarms, they could be aerial, surface, even undersea, operating from hidden spots on shore. It basically turns every bit of coastline along that first island chain, Japan, down through the Philippines into a potential ambush zone. The plan then has to pour resources into just trying to find and defend against this constant cheap threat.
That really paints a picture of how these, well, smaller, cheaper tools are flipping the script, aren't they? And that ties into a major vulnerability for China, their sea lanes, their SLOCs. You hear figures like, what, 90% of their oil comes through the South China Sea and Malacca Strait. That seems incredibly high. Couldn't they just, find other routes or sources eventually?
Well, sure, they'd try to diversify, but the sheer volume of imports, oil, food, resources makes those routes critical, especially the Malacca Strait choke point. So land-based anti-ship systems, drone strikes, maybe launched from western Luzon in the Philippines or southern Taiwan, they can target those tanker routes. Even just a few hits could disrupt oil flow for weeks. Think about the impact on their navy's fuel, let alone the civilian economy. That puts huge economic and, frankly, civil pressure back on Beijing. It raises their strategic risk immensely.
And I guess the AI-enabled drones really amplify this. They act as a manpower multiplier, right? You don't need loads of people to control them.
Exactly. Modern swarm AI lets maybe hundreds of these small drones operate with very little human oversight. And even if the plan tries jamming them with electronic countermeasures,
Mhm.
newer systems use things like mesh communications. The drones talk to each other, forming a resilient network. Plus, onboard AI allows them to adapt, regroup, and press the attack without constant external commands.
Like a self-healing swarm.
Pretty much. They provide that persistent surveillance and strike capability. It forces the Chinese escorts to constantly be on guard, diverting ships and resources just for anti-drone work.
So it's like a digital David versus Goliath swarm.
In a way, yes. And, crucially, this whole approach helps keep U.S. naval forces further back, out of immediate danger.
How does that work?
Instead of putting U.S. carrier groups right inside that first island chain, where they're vulnerable to Chinese missiles, U.S. ships can operate more dispersed, a sort of spread formation, maybe beyond Okinawa or even Guam, out in the wider Western Pacific. They can still project power globally, but the close-in interdiction, the dangerous part, is handled by allies using these shore-based systems.
So the U.S. Navy becomes this force in being. Its presence deters, but it doesn't have to be right in the line of fire.
Precisely. It complicates the plan's calculations without requiring direct, high-risk engagement from U.S. carriers.
And speaking of carriers, that brings up another point. China's carriers are mostly diesel-powered, aren't they? Unlike the U.S. nuclear ones, like the Fujian. That limits them, surely.
Absolutely. Conventional fuel means limited range and time on station compared to nuclear carriers. They depend heavily on underway replenishment ships, oilers, supply ships.
So those become targets, too.
Exactly. Those replenishment ships are vulnerable. Shore-based missiles targeting them could quickly force Chinese carriers back to port or make them operate without their full support group. Either way, they become much less effective, maybe combat ineffective.
So it's not just hitting the carrier, it's hitting its lifeline.
Right. And there's one more asymmetric piece that sort of underpins all this space.
Space. How does that fit in?
Well, in any modern conflict, your satellites, your eyes, ears, communication links in orbit are critical. And they're vulnerable. The key metric isn't just having satellites. It's how fast you can replace them if they get disabled or destroyed. And here, the U.S. has a significant advantage, largely thanks to commercial innovation like SpaceX. Reusable rockets, high launch rates.
Yeah.
It means the U.S. can potentially reconstitute satellite constellations in low Earth orbit much faster than adversaries.
So faster satellite replacement means better resilience for communications and surveillance for these distributed forces we've been talking about.
Exactly. It's a critical enabler.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening? This whole integrated strategy, this land-first containment, using cheap drones, missiles, smart defenses. It seems designed to make operating past that first island chain incredibly costly, maybe prohibitively so, for China. It's about imposing a deterrent that makes simply building more and more big ships. Well, maybe not the winning move anymore. For decades, naval power was about the biggest stick. Now maybe it's about who has the smartest, most distributed swarm.
That's a great way to put it. And maybe the thought to leave with is this. How might this fundamental shift towards decentralized, cost-effective, asymmetric approaches redefine what naval superiority even means for global powers in the coming years?
Yep.
Is it still just about counting the big ships? Or is it something entirely different now?